Nomad Podcast.
What can we do to better ensure our health and wellness during our travels and beyond? This is the question we tackle today with registered nurse and certified nutritionist and health coach, Kara Mosseso. Kara traveled the world for a year with Remote Year Kublai and joins us today to talk about her holistic approach to wellness that involves sleep, nutrition, exercise, stress reduction, hydration, and more. Kara has run 26 marathons and has lived an entirely plant-based diet for over a decade. In this conversation, Kara shares tips for eating healthy while on the road, the role of inflammation in chronic disease, various meal planning tips and resources for constructing healthy meals, the importance of having an accountability partner for making dietary changes that stick, and much more. So Kara was kind enough to come back. We did have an audio glitch at about the 15-minute mark, and Kara was very gracious in agreeing to film the rest of the episode. So hope you enjoy this. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Kara Mosseso. Nomad Podcast is supported in part by Nomad Prep, an online academy that teaches you everything you need to know to take your job on the road and crush it abroad. Enroll today at nomadprep.com/podcast and get your first 4 days of training completely free. Nomad Prep, take your job on the road and take on the world. Okay, Kara, welcome to the Nomad Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Definitely. Okay, so to paint the picture here, today we're going to be talking about health. And specifically, I read a bunch of stuff that you had written, different pieces on your website and the different articles. I like how you laid this out. I want to read, you had like this breakdown of health is composed of nutritious food, movement, job satisfaction, relationships, spirituality, stress management, creativity, sleeping habits, and regularly doing the things you love. I think that's awesome. It's like a really holistic way to approach it. I think today we're specifically going to be focused on nutrition. But before we dig into all that, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you are, what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a nurse practitioner and also a certified health coach. I've been doing both of those things for about 9 years now. Most of my background is in oncology. I worked in head and neck cancer for about 4 years, and for the last 5 years have worked more specifically with hematology and stem cell transplant patients. So a lot of patients with leukemia, lymphomas, that sort of thing. But just kind of in my training and in my studies, I realized there was a lack of focus on preventative care and, my whole educational background. So it's something that I've really taken a special interest in and taken it upon myself to educate myself on those things. 90% of diseases are preventable with certain lifestyle changes, and most of those diseases are reversible when you do make those changes. So I think, we do a disservice to the general population by, as healthcare providers, not kind of relaying that information. So it's something that I really try to focus on. I'm from the Boston area originally, was living in New York before I started on Remote Year. During Remote Year, did a little telemedicine work, and also I have my own health coaching business, so seeing clients mostly US based by video appointment. Since Remote Year has ended, which was last January for my group, continued to travel for a few months, drove cross country from the East Coast to the West Coast, and now I'm in LA doing a 6-month travel nurse practitioner position at a cancer hospital in the LA area.
That's awesome. Yeah, I met your program leader. So you travel with Kublai, right? Remote Year Kublai.
I did. Yeah. Beach and Coco are awesome.
Yeah, I met Beach. I haven't met Coco, but Beach was here in Lisbon. She led the Excelsior group.
Oh, right.
I met her a few months back.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think it's good for people to understand just how much stuff, like I like to understand the implications of something, and then once you say, wow, this is really important, let me pay attention to it. So let me just read through this list you had on one of your pages.
Sure.
The implications of getting poor nutrition include depression, impotence, sleep apnea, insomnia, gallbladder disease, diabetes, kidney disease, osteoporosis, heart disease. And you pointed out the troubling stat that 1 out of every 3 Americans will die of heart disease, stroke, metabolic syndrome, breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, and lung cancer. So that's depressing stuff, but it's also kind of a big red flag, like, hey, this is important stuff. We need to think about what we're eating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not something that's really focused on on in the healthcare industry right now. There's been like a gradual movement towards more preventative and lifestyle changes, but it's been a very slow movement. So I think it's definitely important to keep spreading the word.
What was it particularly about your job that made you want to focus on the preventative stuff versus, like, usually people in healthcare are, at least from my experience, are very fixated on what they learn and they like treat the problems once they occur, but it's only a sliver of those people who then would take it like you have to try and actually go back to the root and get ahead of problems and focus on preventative stuff. What is it? Why do you think that you went that direction?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was based on my own personal experiences. I started eating, I went vegetarian about 15 years ago, a little over 15 years ago, mostly for environmental and animal rights reasons, but noticed a difference in the way I felt, just energy-wise. I was sleeping better and just felt healthier overall. So based on that, just started digging more and more. At the time, I was in college when I went vegetarian. Well, I was in grad school studying to be a nurse practitioner. Just had come across several research papers that I had found on my own that kind of touted the benefits of a more whole foods, plant-based diet for preventing disease. So that piqued my interest, especially knowing how much better I felt when I had made the changes. So did more and more research, and you know, the evidence is definitely there, but because of the way the healthcare system functions, it's largely insurance-based and pharmaceutical company-based, it's hard. It's been really hard to make that shift. And I think we do take a really reductionist approach where we just kind of put a Band-Aid on a problem rather than trying to. The good thing is that, you know, eating one way helps for something else as well, right? So like somebody with heart disease, for example, if they eat to help prevent their heart disease, that also helps prevent diabetes or cancer or that sort of thing. So it's not like it's kind of like a one-size-fits-all approach that I really try to educate patients about. We focus too much on like macronutrients or protein or, you know, but I just think it's really important, and having educated more and more of my patients about it, like working in oncology, patients that have been treated for cancer are much more likely to go on to get another type of cancer. Also, a lot of the cancer treatments put them at higher risk for things like diabetes or heart disease or that sort of thing. So, you know, I feel like I'm doing people a disservice if I don't try to educate them about these things to prevent those things from potentially happening.
Got it. And so assuming that you know, all these different components to health, but we're going to fixate first on nutrition, at least for this episode. That's the topic.
Yeah.
What is your gist of like your approach? So mostly plant-based stuff, but what else? What do you recommend as a health coach to people?
Yeah, so generally focusing mostly on whole foods, plant-based. So, you know, a lot of people might not know exactly what that means. So trying to eliminate as much as possible intake of processed foods. So like anything that comes in a box, for example, is processed to some degree, some more than others. Processed meats like deli meats, hot dogs, sausages, those sorts of things actually have been classified as a class 1 carcinogen, which means they're heavily linked to causing cancer. So avoiding those sorts of things, avoiding anything that has a significant amount of added sugar, and really just maximizing intake of fruits, vegetables, foods that are high in fiber are really good at helping to prevent disease. So the recommended daily intake for like fruits and vegetables, for example, is 9 servings a day. But like, you know, like a very small percentage of people actually meet those goals. So it's less than 10% of people are actually doing that, Americans. So just really trying to increase that. When I'm working with my coaching patients, I don't necessarily say you need to eliminate anything altogether, because I think psychologically, when we are told we can't have something, we want it even more. I know that's how I tend to function. So I really like to focus on like a crowding out approach. So really trying to add in some of the better stuff to naturally crowd out the stuff that might not be as healthy for you. So, you know, even regular meat, dairy, for example, is really high in saturated fat and can increase the risk of things like heart disease and diabetes. So really just trying to focus mostly on whole unprocessed grains, nuts, seeds, beans, fruits, and vegetables, and making that the bulk of what you eat. And if you do eat meat, most societies, hundreds of years ago, they weren't having meat 3 times a day. They were having a small piece a day, if that, maybe just a couple times a week. It's really only over the last 100 years or so that we've been such a meat heavy society, and it's really taken a huge toll on the health of the nation.
Yeah, I did the paleo diet. You're going to hate me. So I did the paleo diet 2 years ago, and I did it, I started maybe 4 years ago, and I did it for 2 years. And I actually felt phenomenal doing it. Now, some of that is actually doing what you're talking about, which is cutting out sugar and dairy.
Right.
I actually cut out grains and most of the starchy carbohydrates. But there was a fair amount of meat intake as a part of that diet. Now, I felt amazing, but not to saying I didn't, that wasn't just tearing up my insides in some other way that I'm unaware of.
Well, that's the thing that, I think there are certain parts of the paleo diet that are really beneficial, I think, like cutting out added sugar and a lot of the processed foods. And it's great for weight loss and that sort of thing because you are eliminating those things. But in terms of data for long-term health, that high of consumption of meat is not good for heart health overall, and also does increase the cancer risk. So short term, I think it does help, people energy wise and with weight loss and that sort of thing. But most of the research shows long term, it's actually fairly detrimental to your health.
How do people know at this point? I feel like we were presented back in the day, we were given this food pyramid, right? And it was exactly upside down, I feel like.
Right.
And so now it's okay, well, we can't trust the FDA to have our back. And then you hear all these things like the Atkins diet and the beach diet and the paleo diet and there's all these diets that are basically presented as being this is the thing. How does anyone at this point, is there a consensus or a peer review or some trustable way to know what actually is legitimately healthy at this point?
Yeah, and it's funny, they want you to be confused because when a new fad diet comes out, that's how they make a buck. So confusing the public is beneficial business-wise for a lot of different people. But all of the research, and it's not new research, it's been around for hundreds of years, points to whole food, plant-based as the diet that helps prevent and treat basically any sort of chronic disease. And that's where the research lies. Like I was saying before, it's not the beneficial thing is that it's not, you have to follow one diet for heart disease and one diet for diabetes and one diet for cancer. It's that whole foods plant-based, if you stick to that, really does encompass all of those things. And that's really where the research lies. There's one physician that I really like. His name is Dr. Michael Greger, and he wrote a book called How Not to Die, which I really recommend anybody read. But basically, he was seeing patients, and kind of came across nutrition research on his own and started digging into it. Was how did I not learn any of this in medical school? Physicians, I think they get, I forget the exact number of hours, but it's something less than 10 hours over their entire med school education of nutrition education. So most physicians that you come across don't have any knowledge of, what you should and shouldn't be eating from an evidence-based perspective. So anyway, he took it upon himself to do all this research, only pulled out the studies that were valid evidence-based studies, and then had an experience with his grandmother where she had terrible heart disease, was told by multiple cardiologists there was nothing they could do for her. She was kind of at death's door, had multiple surgeries already, was on all the cardiac medications possible. And she switched to a completely whole foods, plant-based diet, totally eliminated meat, totally eliminated dairy, any processed foods. And within a matter of weeks, she was up and walking again, where before she was completely bedbound. And when they had told her she only had days left to live, she went on to live several years after that. So seeing that experience with his grandmother, he actually gave up patient care altogether and spends all of his time now just combing through nutrition literature and pulling out the evidence-based studies. And he reports them on this website called nutritionfacts.org. And he will classify them by disease types, what specifics that whole foods plant-based is, so any sort of
Okay, take two. We're back with Kara. We had a little technical snafu, but we're filming again today to resume where we left off. And you were talking about nutritionfacts.org as a source for basically evidence-based nutrition stuff.
Right. So yeah, so Dr. Michael Greger has dedicated his time to just combing through all the nutrition literature that comes out and focuses only on the evidence-based studies and posts them on his site. And he lists them by category depending on disease topic, anything from multiple sclerosis to diabetes to depression to erectile dysfunction. It kind of spans the gamut. But kind of the bottom line for all of those studies is that whole foods, plant-based lifestyle is kind of the cure preventative method for the majority of chronic diseases. Some of the videos he breaks down into specific like spices that might help a specific disease, for example, but kind of, again, the underlying principle is whole foods, plant-based. He has a really good keynote speech that he had given as well called How Not to Die, Preventing and Reversing the 15 Major Killers. And he has that. I can send you the link to that keynote. There's a longer version that's about 80 minutes and then kind of like a short hacked version that's 17 minutes that it's just kind of goes through all of the evidence leading up to it and talks a lot about, for example, how like the standard American diet actually kills more people than, smoking ever did. But the emphasis was always on smoking and how bad that was. But actually what we eat is way more harmful to the population than things like smoking.
Yeah, definitely send me that. I'll link both the short version and the long version in the show notes. That would be great. I guess on this topic, like this is what annoys me is like, I feel like we look to government agencies like the FDA to have our backs and like help us understand what's safe to eat. And yet it feels like we're so betrayed. Like the food pyramid was upside down.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? I know it comes down to economics ultimately on a lot of this stuff. So it's just, it takes people like this doing vigilante justice basically, and sleuthing it out on their own and exposing it to really get the true story.
Yeah, absolutely. And his site is a nonprofit site, so there's no kind of economic vested interest in anything he's doing. It's all for kind of the greater good. And, he dedicates everything he does to his grandmother and her experience. So, unfortunately, the FDA and a lot of those companies are driven by economics. And at the end of the day, it's all a business. So that's kind of where their interests lie, unfortunately.
I've also learned the FDA they call it the revolving door, like execs from these like DuPont and these massive, food companies will go spend like 2 years creating the legislation and then go, benefit from the changes in the laws, which just seems completely corrupt.
Yeah, it's very backwards.
Well, so not focusing on all that negativity, but what can the average person do? Like, is there a meal planner app or a book, or like, what's the framework that you use for constructing like healthy meals?
Yeah, there are a few different resources. So one I really like to recommend to people is Dr. Michael Greger, the same one who does nutritionfacts.org. He put together the list of something called the Daily Dozen, which is basically he categorizes food groups by kind of where you get your most bang for your buck and kind of builds a checklist of how many servings of each of those things you should be striving for every day. And he has an app for that. I think if you just search like Daily Dozen in the App Store, it should come up. I also put together a Google Doc based on that, that I can give you a link for that as well if people are interested in that. But it's categorized by, instead of just like fruits, he also like separates berries from other types of fruits because berries are even more powerful in terms of antioxidants and that sort of thing. So his breakdown is a little bit different than like a traditional food pyramid. But based on all the research he's done, he's kind of categorized things that way. There's also, people may have heard of the documentary Forks Over Knives, which was kind of one that came out a while ago, but they have a really comprehensive website that has a lot of different recipes, but they also have a free meal planner on there as well, where it will give you recipe ideas for 3 meals a day over the course of a couple weeks, just to kind of get people on track. So I think that's a really good resource as well. Those are probably 2 of the most well-known and like easiest to use, I think, that I would definitely recommend.
When I signed up for your newsletter and I got, you had like a smoothie recipe list. I used to be big into the NutriBullet, and so I have a list of my own. I'll link those as well. But yeah, just I think experimenting with a lot of stuff and figuring out what you like, and it's probably good.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So so this meal planner, like one of these meal planner apps, whatever people are most comfortable with, just to at least make some fundamental changes. And then it sounds like there's specific foods based on a condition that you might have that are helpful. Like I've heard turmeric, for example, is good for certain ailments.
Yeah. Spices in general are really potent, and turmeric is probably, if I were to recommend anything for like kind of the general population, turmeric is one of the most important ones to include in your diet. It just has really powerful anti-inflammatory properties, and kind of the root of a lot of chronic diseases come from inflammation in the body from like one source or another. So it's a really powerful anti-inflammatory, even if you aren't having any sort of like, chronic issues that are bothering you. But any sort of like muscle aches or pains, it's really good for helping to treat that as well. Generally a teaspoon a day is like a good size serving. So you can either have that, spread out over the course of the day, or sometimes I like to make like turmeric lattes where I'll put in a teaspoon of turmeric with some almond milk and some cinnamon and a little bit of black pepper, because turmeric is actually better absorbed when it's combined with black pepper.
Is there a site that you recommend for not like the fundamental food constructing your meals, but maybe like a remedy based with spices and all that stuff? Is there any resources you know of for that?
So nutritionfacts.org is also good for that too. Like he does have kind of a wide span of videos that focus on specific spices. That's probably the best well-known one that I'm aware of. There is another physician that talks a lot about just kind of like natural remedies for healing, Dr. Axe, A-X-E, and he has a lot of stuff on his website just about different types of herbs and spices and kind of nutritional things. He isn't necessarily 100% plant-based in his teachings. I would say the majority of what he focuses on is plant-based, the bulk of it. So like there's some information on that site that I don't completely agree with, but I think for various things, it's a really good source, especially when he talks about spices and that sort of thing.
Nice. I think we actually host his website. I'm not 100% of that.
Oh,
but
really?
I'm pretty sure Paige, they host that site. So that's
yeah. Cool. So yeah, those are really good sources. And I can look into something too. I'm sure there's probably like a book that kind of goes through all that thing, or, a specific website, but I tend to rely pretty heavily on nutritionfacts.org just for most of my information, just because I know it's all evidence-based. But
Can you talk about inflammation, like dig into that a little bit more? Like I have a remedial understanding of it. I've always heard that, people get mad at cholesterol, but the analogy is like, well, cholesterol is just doing its job. Like it's the inflammation that's the issue. And it's like getting mad at an ambulance for going to the scene of an accident. You don't do that. Like it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's the inflammation underlying that that's the true issue.
yeah, definitely. And cholesterol, our bodies produce its own cholesterol, and cholesterol is a vital part of how our bodies function. It tends to be the added cholesterol that tends to be an issue. So we don't need to consume cholesterol. Our body produces enough of it on its own. But yeah, generally like any inflammation in the arteries, for example, causes the blood vessels to constrict a bit. So the blood flow isn't as good. And then when the blood flow isn't as good, you tend to have a kind of fatty plaques that will build up in the arteries that cause blockages and cause all sorts of issues. And not just heart issues. It's, that tends to be like the major thing that we think of when we think of blocked arteries, but really blocked arteries restrict blood flow to every organ in the body, from, your brain to your liver to your kidneys. So we focus really heavily on the heart, but any sort of restricted blood flow affects anything in our body. So there are different types of inflammation. You can have inflammation within the walls of the arteries. You can have inflammation of the joints and the muscles that can, lead to things like arthritis. So yeah, it happens at kind of different cellular levels in the body, causing different problems. But I would say kind of like the major issue that happens with inflammation is restricted blood flow in one way or another.
But this is reversible. It's not, you can have inflammation and then you switch the diet. And it sounds like what you're saying, it's just night and day. You can have like these turnarounds, miraculous recoveries just purely by switching your diet.
Absolutely, yeah. And it can happen within a matter of days too. Maybe not completely reversal, but some sort of regression in the issue. The video that I had mentioned, the kind of 17-minute video from Dr. Michael Greger, he actually shows some pictures of people that have changed their diet and the differences in their arteries that you would see on like a CT angiogram or something that measures the amount of plaque buildup that somebody has in their arteries. And you can actually see the difference within a matter of weeks just by, changing diet alone. And it's pretty remarkable. Unfortunately, a lot of the medications that people take for these issues, it doesn't reverse the problem. It's a Band-Aid approach for kind of keeping the problem at bay. And you may see some improvement, but if you continue to eat the same way, it's like this constant battle, back and forth, rather than just kind of reversing the problem in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's anytime we're talking about making fundamental changes, like habit changes, this is not something that just happens super easy for people. Eating habits are ingrained over a lifetime. Do you have any recommendations there for like, how do you take baby steps and start to incorporate this in? I know you mentioned crowding it out as a strategy, but can you just talk about any kind of general strategy you have there?
Yeah. I mean, I think taking baby steps is the better way to do it overall. I think most of us don't do well when we take a head first approach into things, especially if we are so used to eating a certain way. So I think when you make gradual changes over time, it is much more sustainable long term. So like, I always think it's more helpful, instead of having like the overarching goal, like rather than telling yourself like, oh, I'm going to eat 100% plant-based, like that seems like a really daunting goal to a lot of people. So instead, like setting up small incremental goals over time. So maybe you say, maybe you take inventory of how many servings of vegetables or fruits you're eating on a daily basis, and figuring out like, oh, I only eat 3 servings of fruits and vegetables, and then setting a goal of, okay, I'm going to try to eat 4 servings of fruits and vegetables every day. And once you're doing that consistently, kind of slowly increasing your goal from there. So I think making small incremental changes over time is really more sustainable for the majority of the population. Some people function well from kind of diving headfirst and making all the changes at once, but I think that's rare.
Yeah, so know yourself. This sounds like more of a personal question. Like if the idea of trying to do it fully orthodox is then going to just sabotage the whole thing and you're going to fall off the wagon, then take baby steps. But if you're someone who just like thrives off of going all in, like maybe that is a good strategy for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think some element of accountability is really helpful as well. So maybe, finding a friend or a family member or something that kind of gets on board with your goals, and you try to do it together and you can hold each other accountable, or looking for, a health coach that you meet with once a week or once a month or something, just to kind of check in and have some sense of accountability.
Do you
I always
track
find
your meals? Do you actually log what you eat every week?
not anymore. I mean, now, when I first started, I kind of kept better track of what I was doing. And even when I first found the Daily Dozen checklist, I kind of used it as a guide to figure out like what I might be missing over the course of the day. But now I feel like, so I had mentioned I went vegetarian 15 years ago. I've been eating 100% plant-based for the last 10 years now. So, it's been a long time for me. So now I just kind of have a general sense of what I need to be doing and what I'm missing over the course of the day. And certainly every day isn't perfect, but I always think it's better, like progress is better than perfection in my book. So, yeah, I have a general sense, but I think it's very helpful when you're first getting started to kind of have some sort of guide, just to kind of get you into your new habits. And then once those habits are formed, it becomes kind of routine. You don't even have to think about it anymore.
There was an app, Eddie Contento was my third guest, and he talked about this app called Habit Share. That's like an accountability app where you can basically set up some goals like this, and it's a way of you having a partner and being able to check in and track progress towards those goals. So it sounds like that'd be maybe a good use of that app for here.
Yeah, that would be a great use of that app. I hadn't heard of that app, but I think that would be a really helpful way to do it. And I think just kind of keeping yourself informed on the literature too, like, and kind of constantly watching videos and reading certain articles about, these sorts of things. It's a good way to kind of remind yourself why it's important to make these changes. Because I think, it's easy to like read one article and kind of be gung-ho about making the changes and make them initially and kind of fall off. But I think to kind of like, subscribe to like a newsletter or subscribe to like nutritionfacts.org video sites or something, so you're getting like weekly emails with these sorts of topics that, maybe you're not doing it every day or every week, but like a couple times a month, just kind of checking in and watching these things to reinforce why you're making the changes you're making, I think can be really helpful as well.
So here's a question, and I don't know the PC way to ask this, but like I've seen people who are vegan like tend, or at least to me, to look like kind of gaunt and like sunken features and like almost waxy. Like it doesn't look healthy. Why is that? Or is that doing vegan the wrong way? Or like what accounts for that?
Yeah, I think it's doing vegan the wrong way. I mean, I like to use the term whole foods plant-based over vegan, because vegan doesn't necessarily confer health in my book. Like Oreos are vegan, French fries are vegan, like there are certain things, like I think a lot of times, and I don't want to stereotype, but I think a lot of times the people that you see that are maybe gaunt or don't look as healthy are the people that are doing it more for ethical reasons. So maybe they don't have as much knowledge about how to, appropriately nourish themselves to, really be kind of like have that healthy vitality to them. So I think it's really just doing it the wrong way. When I first made the switch from vegetarian to vegan, especially being in the healthcare sector, I made sure I did a lot of reading beforehand to make sure I was getting everything that I needed.
Is it challenging, or what is the most challenging thing to get in that scenario?
Vitamin B12 is really the only thing that you can't get from what you're eating, and it's mostly because of the way that our food is processed and grown now. So vitamin B12, people kind of have the idea that it comes from animals, but it actually comes from bacteria. And if we were eating this way, like 100 years ago, we would be able to get it through fruits and vegetables because of like the soil that's grown in. The bacteria existed in that soil. But our soil that we tend to grow things in now is very depleted of the nutrients and everything that it used to contain. So just by eating plant-based, it's really hard to get B12. And again, it's not because it comes from animals. It's just animals eat like from a different type of soil and they have it in their systems. And that's why people can get it through eating, red meat or chicken or whatever now. So it is important if you're eating 100% plant-based to take a vitamin B12 supplement a couple times a week. So you're generally striving to take 2,500 micrograms over the course of the week. So usually you find like 1,000 microgram tabs. So if you take like 2 or 3 of those a week, then that's generally enough to cover your needs. That's really the main thing. The other thing that I generally tend to supplement with, which has nothing to do with being plant-based really, and a lot of meat eaters are devoid in vitamin D as well. So vitamin D, I think, is just another thing across the board that's important for the majority of the world to supplement in. Most of us live in a world or in a location where we're not getting adequate sun exposure to actually get the vitamin D that we need. And applying sunscreen, you don't absorb vitamin D. So that's another thing I think is just generally important to supplement with.
What about protein? I mean, I know it's possible to get protein plant-based, but is that a challenge at all, or do you find no issue getting adequate protein?
No, I don't find any issue. I think a lot of people take for granted the amount of protein that vegetables actually contain. Like, so leafy greens, for example, have more protein per calorie than red meat. So like calorie-wise, right, you have to eat a lot more kale to get to the number of calories as you would like a piece of steak, but just to kind of like put that into perspective. And also, I like to kind of say, like, if you think about a lot of the animals that we eat as our protein source, like a cow, for example, where does a cow get their protein? What do they eat? They only eat plants, right? So like basically by eating plants, you're cutting out the middleman and going straight to the source. So I think just as long as you're eating a wide variety of plant-based foods, it's pretty easy to meet those goals without much effort. And actually the majority of people that eat a standard American diet eat almost double the recommended daily intake of protein. And more protein isn't necessarily better. It actually starts to put a big strain on your kidneys when you're consuming protein in excess amounts. And animal protein also has something called heme iron, which is a type of iron that when you have too much of it starts to build up in your organs and can also be linked to causing cancer. So like excess animal protein can actually be really harmful for people.
Yeah,
so as long
I
as
know in that Forks Over Knives movie, I believe that was the one where there was like an MMA fighter who was strictly vegetarian. And so it's like clearly possible, the dude was yoked.
right.
So it's clearly possible to get adequate protein from doing this.
Absolutely. And there are more and more athletes now that are actually turning to that type of lifestyle. So there are a lot of like bodybuilders that are like strictly, vegan bodybuilders. There are a lot of endurance athletes, like a lot of endurance runners that have switched to that type of lifestyle. There's an endurance athlete that I really like. He was a former attorney and now has kind of like switched to podcasting and kind of spreading the word about plant-based eating, Rich Roll. I really enjoy his podcast, but he's an example of an endurance athlete. There are a few football players that have switched to it. Tom Brady eats mostly vegan, and a few other athletes as well. So it's something I think that people before that were so heavily focused on protein are actually seeing the benefit, and what a lot of them have said is like their recovery time seems to be faster, after a game or an athletic event. They're seeing less injuries, they're faster, performing better. And people are starting to see the value in it and kind of let go of the old stereotypes that you were like kind of this weak measly.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I don't have many more questions. I think the other things that I was just going to I'm looking through my notes here. So you've run 26 marathons? Is that?
I have, yeah. I'm training for my 27th at the moment. And I've done all 26 of them. They've all been within the last 10 years. So I've done them all, 100% plant-based. But yeah, it's been one of my favorite ways to kind of combine my passions of travel and running. Running for me is like nothing clears my head better than running. It actually is very meditative for me, and I definitely feel that runner's high after I run a long race. So one of the things that I've really tried to do is run a marathon in different locations. So it's been a really great way to kind of immerse myself in a culture a little bit more, where you're running with people that, it's a really
great way to explore the town, right? You get somewhere, you're going to run, you do that 5 times, you've seen a lot.
Definitely. And I think it's just a really unifying sport too. But it's been great. Like I've run a marathon in the desert in Israel. I ran a marathon along Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, and one in Berlin, one in Dublin. I'm running one in Antarctica in 2020.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been a really fun way to kind of travel and, also keep my fitness going as well.
Do you have any running tips as long as we're on this? Do you do the forefront strike running or the lactic threshold running or anything like that?
I do. So for me, if I make it too structured, it starts to lose its fun for me. But I got really into it actually right around the time that Born to Run came out. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. So I was just really, I had always run, but never really more than 5 or 6 miles at a time. And I ran track. I did the hurdles in high school. So I always did shorter distance running. And a friend, around 2010 or so got me into long distance running, and was reading Born to Run at the time. So as I was kind of upping my mileage, I started to focus more on running more on my toes. And I've always run in Nike Frees, which are supposed to be the more barefoot type running, but not not completely barefoot. There's still some support, but they do force you to run a bit more on your toes. And for me, I think that's been really helpful. In all the running I've done, I have not had one running related injury at all, which I think, is partly I attribute it to kind of my eating, and partly to the way I've kind of trained my body to run.
Yeah, I'm a runner as well. I used to run the heel strike method, and a friend got me into the Vibrams and the whole running that certain way. I think it's interesting. You don't need to have like special shoes to do this. It's really just a matter of changing the style that you run in. It's just that the
Definitely.
shoes necessitate that you run that way because there is no heel support. So you're not, it doesn't compensate. In other words, you're going to really feel it if you try to run heel
Right.
strike style.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I, for anybody that is trying to like shift into that running, I would just advise to kind of like slowly work your way up to it, because you do start to use different muscles in both your feet, your calves, the rest of your legs. So I think it's important to like, work your way into running that way by doing a few miles at a time here and there, and then slowly building up so you don't injure yourself.
Cool. Yeah, there was a good video that I saw that got me into it. I'll link that one as well if people want to watch it. But yeah, it was like not intuitive making that switch, and it was kind of a very awkward, weird thing until I saw this video, and then it just kind of all clicked. So I'll link that.
Yeah, cool.
Cool. All right. Well, how do people, you have your site, which is the Nomadic Nutrition. How do people, if they want to engage with you or get your newsletter or just connect with you more, how do they do that?
So they can sign up for my newsletter on my site. It's nomadicnourishment.com. So they can sign up there. I have my email or my business email attached to that as well, to that website, so they can email me directly through that website. I'm also on Instagram as Kmo_on the go. So a lot of times there I'll post photos linking to my most recent blog posts, or just kind of like health related content combined with travel related content in general. I also have a Facebook business page for my health coaching. If people just type in Kara Mosseso, Mossesso health coaching, it should pop up. They can follow me on there. I post health related information on there as well.
And do you do personalized like consultations remotely with people? You health coach over the internet?
I do, yeah. I have a few clients that I'm working with right now, because I'm also working full-time as a nurse practitioner. I haven't necessarily been actively seeking out new clients, but I have been kind of taking referrals as they come from friends and family. So I do it in different ways, either as a one-time consultation or as like kind of a coaching package over the span of 3 to 6 months, depending on what the needs are of the particular person. So something, I'm definitely open to if there is interest. The other thing I've done a couple times that I did twice over the course of Remote Year is I had this 30-day plant-based challenge that a lot of the people in my group ended up joining in on. And the goal wasn't necessarily to eat 100% plant-based, over the course of the 30 days. Some people did do that, but others just were looking for a way to eat healthier while they were traveling. So kind of joined in, and I sent out daily emails kind of with tips about how to do it, as well as certain like educational components about why it was important to eat healthier. And it's something I've been considering running again. So if people that listen to this podcast express interest in that, I'm kind of trying to gauge what the interest level is. But I was thinking about running it again in the next month or two. If people would be interested.
I will definitely take you up on that whenever you run it. I'm on your newsletter now, so I'm assuming you'll send out something if you decide to send it up again.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. I did think of one thing I forgot to ask you. So we didn't really, we talked a lot about nutrition and the theory of it, which is great. But like, what about just practicality? When you're on the road, you don't have your kitchen, obviously you're in a new place every month. What do you advise there? Is there any kind of hacks or tips or tricks for being able to cook better when you're like that?
Yeah, so travel obviously adds in an extra element of difficulty when you're trying to plan things out. But for me, it was really helpful to kind of like seek out farmers markets in the places that I was traveling to. It depends where you are and what time of year. The way I tended to travel with my group, we kind of followed summer all year, so it was really easy to find farmers markets pretty much wherever we were. But I found that really helpful just in terms of getting fresh produce. I also think it's really helpful to kind of look at the bulk bins in the grocery stores you're at to look for things like brown rice and grains that are really cheap and easy to make at home. one thing I did, Malaysia was the first country I traveled to this year, and I ended up buying this like $1 can opener that was like just one of those little ones, like this big handheld, and traveled with that for the year. So it was really easy to eat things like, you know, a can of beans and like open that, and, you know, something that's pretty simple to make. Also, like fresh fruits and vegetables are always more preferable, but canned and frozen is better than no fruits and vegetables, right? So if you don't have access to really good fresh vegetables, buying canned vegetables and using your can opener is another way to kind of squeeze in, more nutrients where you might not be having them otherwise. I also think it's really helpful. Oh, the other thing I traveled around with was a collapsible vegetable steamer. So something that you could just stick into a pot or pan and steam vegetables pretty easily. It's also really helpful, I think.
With your Vitamix or not?
No, that's like the one thing. There was no like material possessions I missed while I was traveling except my Vitamix. That was the one thing that I really missed. So
we had a guy in our group who did. He brought it, and it required bringing this giant generator. His name was Montre, and it must have been in all like 40 pounds of stuff that he lugged around with him the entire year. And yeah, it's cool. I lived with him a month and we made smoothies, but man, that was like the massive thing to bring with.
Yeah, that's serious commitment. It takes up a lot of your baggage weight. But I wish I had mine over the course of the year. The smoothies, I relied heavily on those beforehand, so that was definitely something I missed. And I also think it's really helpful just, if you're traveling with other people to kind of pool together and buy ingredients and cook together. I think kind of one of the biggest deterrents for not cooking is that you don't have like spices or vinegars or things like that available, or you don't want to spend the money on them for, a short amount of time and then throw them away when you travel. So I think if you kind of like join forces and kind of buy those things together and share them, it kind of motivates you to either cook together or use them on your own and like trade off. I also traveled around with little Ziploc bags of like turmeric and ground flaxseed and that sort of thing. So if I couldn't find them in a particular place, I always had access to them.
Did that ever get you stopped at TSA saying like, what is this Ziploc bag of?
Surprisingly, no. I always put it in my checked bag. But yeah, surprisingly, I never got questioned about it.
Cool. All right. Well, so it's nomadicnutrition.com. You can sign up.
Nomadicnourishment.com.
Nomadicnourishment.com.
Yeah.
Sign up for the newsletter there, get the tips. And yeah, any parting thoughts for people listening that are like considering the plant-based diet, considering going nomadic?
For a little bit of both. Just to kind of like put things into perspective, just in terms of like lifestyle changes in general, I think a lot of people tend not to make changes until they're like at a point where it might be too late, or they're already sick or like trying to recover for something. But just to like kind of give you an idea. So for example, like a lot of times if there are children that die that undergo autopsies, a lot of children that follow a standard American diet, by the age of 10, when they undergo autopsies, they already have atherosclerotic plaques in their arteries by age 10. So like even by that age, it's not an issue of prevention, it's already an issue of reversal. So I think just realizing that like there are a lot of things happening in your body that, it might take a while to come to fruition to cause a major problem that you might not know exists. So making lifestyle changes before it gets to that point is really important. Also, like what you eat, you are what you eat, like in a literal way. Like anything you put in your mouth affects you on a cellular level because it becomes the building blocks of, what makes up your actual body. So you're constantly in a state of cellular turnover, and like almost every year to every few years, you have completely new cells, and what you ate the year before affects kind of what makes up those cells. So I think when you think about it at that level, it kind of shifts your perception about what you should be doing in a different way. And just in terms of the nomad lifestyle, I think it's a really important lesson in minimalistic living, adaptation, and just a really great way to expose yourself to other cultures and make you a more empathetic person in general. It was such an amazing experience, and it's nothing I would give back, for anything in the world. So if anybody's been considering doing it and hasn't been out there yet, I would strongly recommend it.
Awesome. Well, Kara, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate you coming back for a second time because it didn't work out the first time. So
yeah, sorry about the connection issues before.
Yeah, no worries at all. All right. Thank you so much. Be well, Kara.
Yeah, same to you. Bye, Sean.
Cheers. Okay, that was my conversation with Kara Mosseso. If you have a question for Kara, you can leave her a written or a video comment underneath her episode. And she said she would be happy to answer questions. So I did talk to her after the episode, and she said indeed she is running the 30-day plant-based challenge, and that's coming soon. So if you want to be a part of that, make sure you sign up on her website. That URL again is nomadicnourishment.com. So coming up next week, we have Bernie Miller, who is a sleep specialist with the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. He's going to be talking to us about how to get better sleep on the road. When your bed is changing week to week, it can pose a challenge there. And personally, this is a very useful conversation. I have struggled with sleep myself, and so this is a great topic. If you are someone who struggles with sleep, you're going to want to make sure you listen to that. So a couple bits of housekeeping here. If you're considering doing a nomadic travel program, you can save up to $300 off select programs simply by going to our discounts page. You'll find that link in the footer of our site under program discounts, or simply go to nomadpodcast.com/discounts to apply for any of the available programs. Note that if you do apply directly to the travel program, it does invalidate your opportunity to get the discount, so be sure to apply via the form on our website. Nomad Podcast is supported in part by Nomad Prep, an online academy for aspiring digital nomads taught by yours truly that teaches you everything you need to know to make the transition to the digital nomad lifestyle. Get your first 4 days of this 2-week program completely free by going to nomadprep.com/podcast. Nomad Prep, take your job on the road and take on the world. If you are a travel blogger, we now have a platform that will allow you to reach a wider audience. You can go to nomadbloggers.com and click the submit link in the header, the blue button up there, to add your blog. If you've enjoyed the content thus far, the greatest compliment you can give is that of a referral. So consider sharing this on your social media, whether that's a tweet, a Facebook share. You can also now share Instagram stories, make it very easy to share any Instagram post to your story. So our social media handle across all of those channels is Nomad Prep. And also what helps is leaving a rating or review on your favorite podcasting platform. So if you found this content valuable, doing that, just taking a few seconds to do that, really helps us grow the audience. It helps us cut through kind of the noise out there in other podcasts and reach more people. So take a moment, if you would, and leave a rating and a review on your favorite podcasting platform. All right. So that's all. Thanks for listening. As always, this is such a pleasure to be able to have this role to help disseminate information that's helpful for nomads. And so I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you come back and tune into a future episode. And until then, it's a big world out there. Get out there and explore it. I'll see you on the road.
Nomad.